Morning, guys. In beautiful Heber. Got a little bit of frost this morning. And the mountains look amazing. There's a little bit of snow on them. That combination of like the fall leaves with the snow on the top, that's epic. I love it. Feels good to be back in the mountains. So I wanted to have this conversation with you guys via Mike Glover Actual Stories versus my main channel, because my main channel is monetized, meaning YouTube could run ads on my main channel and I get paid. It's one of the sole sources of income. But I knew there was a high probability of it being demonetized and even further suppressed based on the subject matter, which is on Mike Glover Actual. The last post is Trump will win and here's why. Now, I want to expand on that thought and also articulate better why I think this. I gave some context for first, second, and third quarter. I didn't explain what that meant, and I didn't explain what's going to happen in fourth quarter, but I'll do my best. Also, if you're interested, supporting the channel, supporting me and my company and the hardworking people that work for me, we just released our fall line that's going into winter. You guys can check it out. I'll link it down below for Fieldcraft Survival. This jacket and a whole bunch of cool swag and stuff that we're doing at Fieldcraft. Flannel shirts, all this stuff. Let's use the analogy first, second, third, and fourth quarter. We're already into first quarter. And the strategy change has likely come because of internal analytical polls. Right? They look at the internal polls, meaning they do the polls themselves, and they start looking at the data. And the data is painting the picture that Kamala is going to lose. Remember, the overwhelming majority of the country are moderates, or classified as purple. You know, if it's, I don't know the exact specific percentage, but it's something like 20 GOP, 20 DNC, and then the rest of the country is more moderate, where they could be swayed on either side. They're classified as independents, or they just don't subject their ideology to one specific party in this country. That plays in the fourth quarter, and I'll explain why. So first quarter is a big shift in strategy for the Democrats, for Kamala Harris. You've seen it. I've seen it. I looked at every national media, corporate media page, both web and on TV, and all of them are running with the same rhetoric, which is everything that Kamala is saying in her talking points, including calling Trump a fascist and Hitler, and associating the rally with a hate rally or hate speech and a fascist Nazi rally that took place in Madison Square Garden in 1939. Also, Clinton, Bush, Carter, I don't know, the New York Mets, a lot of people utilize Madison Square Garden, and somehow they've gotten and convinced MSNBC to run a story where they're showing video of a fascist 1930s rally, comparing it to the rally that took place in Madison Square Garden with tens of thousands of diversified Americans, where you had black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Jewish, the list goes on. And yesterday, because they continue to run with the rhetoric, Kamala Harris did her last go to war speech and finalizing or wrapping up her campaign by calling Trump a tyrannical leader. And the same day that Biden came out and was, whether it was caught on camera and released, called Trump supporters trash or garbage. So if you're likely the majority, which is above 50% of the country, that's a voting age and that's going to vote in this election, you're garbage, you're hot trash. So they're running with that rhetoric because they want something very specific in second quarter. If the analysis and the data shows them they're going to lose, well, it's why you get a week and a half of this rhetoric, a last-ditch effort to set the stage for second and third quarters. So second quarter takes place on Tuesday. You'll probably reap the results on Wednesday, which is Trump wins. I don't even think it's going to be close. I think Trump, electoral and popular vote, will landslide into victory. And he'll be setting the stage to be inaugurated in late January. Except if we've incited enough radical leftists in this country who are willing, just like for other causes, to hit the streets and burn down cities and towns across America in protest, well, then they've done their job in first quarter. Because second quarter is going to be inciting the rhetoric. It's also going to be used to utilize the DOJ, Department of Justice, and lawfare to hold up the process, which they won't hold it up till January, but what they'll do is, as long as they can, drag it out to create this last-ditch effort in fighting and campaigning for the country, because we don't want to secede and give it up to a tyrannical Nazi fascist presidential candidate who just got elected. So that's important. That's an important point, because the more that they could shove it down your throats, the more that they motivate and propagate all of these radicals who've been waiting to hit the streets and go crazy. So you're going to see that. And that's important to note, because the national and corporate media, which is backing obviously them, is going to come out just like they did with BLM and Antifa and promote how unheard patriots are concerned about democracy in this country. And so it's going to justify them doing what they do. And the Department of Justice obviously is not going to charge anybody. They're not going to do anything. So where you have people still today via January 6th being convicted and sent to jail for a year plus, not one person that I've known of has been charged with anything via the riots that literally burned down black businesses during the BLM and Antifa riots. That Antifa attacked federal buildings in Portland, Oregon for a year and nobody was charged. So that's important to note, because we could, speaking for them, we could radicalize an American population who's fighting for democracy because they're unheard, right? And then conservative governors across the nation, I don't know, like Ron DeSantis, who's not going to accept that, cities like Tallahassee are going to get burned down by radicals. He's going to enforce the laws. And then you're going to have this conundrum. You're going to have law enforcement officers with National Guard troops deployed by the states, potentially defending themselves against these radicals, like happened in Denver, Colorado, where the news reported that they were innocent protests, peaceful protesters, except the pictures behind the scenes from the law enforcement officers who were dealing with all of this chaos was pallets of bricks, pipe bombs, improvised explosive devices being thrown at police officers where they're being injured, but it's not being reported. So can you imagine this scenario where a law enforcement officer defends his or her life, a National Guardsman defends his or her life, and the national corporate media decides to weaponize that and use it as propaganda like they've done everything else? I just saw a news story last night, where it was, I believe, ABC that reported the FCC is going to look into Elon Musk and Starlink and stopping Elon from launching satellites into space because it was littering space. You won't talk to Verizon or AT&T or power electric companies across the entire nation via their infrastructure that is embedded in communities across the entire country. Yet we're worried about the real estate in space for a capability called Starlink that is literally painting the way for our capabilities into the future for disaster, catastrophe response, and connecting people across the globe in harm's way. But the US government, of course, weaponizing the national media, the corporate media, and the US government is going to go after Elon because they don't like his politics, just like they're preventing him from launching rockets off the Pacific coast. Just like now they've pulled his grants from the US government for electric cars. All of a sudden, electric cars isn't being talked about by the left. Why? Because that would promote one of the biggest electric car companies in the country, which is going against the narrative. That's the fight. So I described third quarter. What does fourth quarter look like? Well, it leads up to the inauguration. And this is important to note. I talked to Evan Hafer about this, who's smarter than me politically because he understands strategic elements and how it ties together, where my sergeant major brain is focused kind of like on the tactical battle space of things going on that affect and impact people. He's a bigger brain when it comes to 30,000 foot perspectives. And we were talking about it. They said, listen, man, there is no incentive for the GOP or the Democrats to pull the American people away from any party, left or right, because those two parties, if compromised, would disenfranchise and empower those politicians affiliated or associated with it. Meaning, if we had a breakdown in our country and there was a third party created, which is the majority of the country, and they jumped on the bandwagon, the right and left, figuratively speaking, but GOP and DNC would be irrelevant in the conversation. And they don't want that. So they will secede because they want to maintain power for a legacy organization that's been around 100 years that is interested in maintaining their influence, power, and continued corruption. So they will hand it over. And Trump will be inaugurated. But then they will spend the next 4 years utilizing the action arms of the corporate media, trying to regain control of the House and the Senate, and doing everything they can to destroy the presidency, including sabotaging and subverting Donald Trump. That's going to happen. With all the rhetoric, with all the campaigning, that's going to happen. And I'll forecast it even further, something that me and Evan talked about. Gavin Newsom will be the great change in the country that's needed for 4 years down the road. Obviously, Trump can't run again because he can't run for a third term, but it will be Trump. Likely, I see a J.D. Vance versus Gavin Newsom. And so fourth quarter evolves, and where you stand and where I stand is we're caught in the middle, guys. There's not a lot we could do for the federal fuckery that's happening in this country, but there's a lot we could do here in our own backyards. I met with Lori, a good friend, and her husband Jim down the road at a meeting with our local sheriff, Sheriff Rigby, here in Heber City. And we talk about local issues. And the astounding thing I've realized in people even communicating with government officials in their own backyard is they still are campaigning and conversing with people in their own backyard, the legislators, the elected officials, as if they need to change things for the change they know needs to take place in their heart. So they feel anxious or paranoid because crime is increasing, where I just found out yesterday the feds are dropping off illegals in our own backyard here in Wasatch County. Mind blown. I mean, I knew about that, but to hear it from the sheriff, I'm like, oh, so that's the thing. Oh, they're also dropping him off, and if we roll them up, we can't do anything about it because they'll just take him into custody and then drop him off again. So that's happening in our own backyard here in, I would call it rural Heber City, Utah, population of 17,000 people, whereby there's not a lot of resources here or housing here. It's very limited. So you take an illegal who has not a lot of opportunity in public housing or jobs, etc., roaming the streets. Well, there's an argument for desperation for survival that turns into potential illegal issues, illegal criminal issues. I mean, there was a guy murdered, found dead, I believe, in his vehicle near Jordanelle, which is in Wasatch County, which is our first homicide in a couple years. And so I was interested in this meeting and went to the town meeting and heard everybody say their piece. And I got up at the end because I had to get back home and started communicating to everybody about the realization that Sheriff Rigby's job is to enforce the laws. All the other elements, situational awareness, reporting crime, being aware, using deadly force in personal defense if warranted, all these elements via our liberties and freedoms are things that we need to exercise on our own. And so if we have a feeling that we're like a little bit anxious about the world, the answer is not going to the sheriff and saying, you need to fix this. The answer is looking inside of ourselves, organizing within ourselves and saying, hey man, their job isn't to do this. They're stretched thin already. Let's build up our community watch elements. Let's do that for our own town and our own people, and then liaison and support these officers the best way we know how. Like there was a young man who was there last night with his wife. He's a good guy. I know he's a good guy. I could tell. I've heard about him. And he was talking about the idea of deputizing civilians. We don't want that. I don't want that. You don't want that. What you want is all the liberties and freedoms, as long as they're being protected, which is a valid argument, right? Having that conversation was valid last night. Like, Sheriff, are you going to protect our constitutional rights? And the answer unequivocally from Sheriff Rigby was yes. So, okay, that's the right answer. The wrong answer is leaning into this idea that we need to somehow be enforcement officers or peace officers to police ourselves up, to take care of our own. We'll do that on our own within the confines of the law. Like, he asked the question, like, are you going to have my back if somebody comes into my house and potentially does something wrong? So one of the guys asked this. No, it was one of the gals that asked this. And it was a hypothetical. It's like, don't ask that question. Understand the laws in Utah, the Castle Doctrine, the stand your ground, and then do what you know is right for defending your life. Yeah, sure, you need training, but don't articulate that in advance. Do what you have to do to protect yourself and your family, right? This is not begging for forgiveness. This is your constitutional right. And yes, I will acknowledge that there are a lot of places that aren't acknowledging the Constitution, people's inherent right to even self-defense, because they're skewing it. I don't feel that way here in the backyard of Heber City, Utah, thus yet. But I mean, even the immigration problem, yes, it's a problem, but how do we fix that problem? We protest together. We show up at city council meets together. We do the thing that we did yesterday in the meet together. We start our community tribes of Wasatch Community Watch. We start having these conversations, and then we start getting involved in politics. And if we don't like who the politicians are in their seats, then we put our own people in charge. And it's that easy. I mean, it sounds easy. And I think last night what I realized is a lot of people, they don't know the start point. I feel guilty in sitting in that meeting, knowing the answer and realizing that I haven't done it myself. So I'm going to do that. I talked about it in a recent social media post about starting your own tribe. I'll end the video this way. If you want to start your own tribe, you got to show up. You got to bring people together. The best chance you have of surviving or being resilient as a person, as a family, as a community is doing it geographically. Sure, it'd be nice to have Andy come on site and help me in the worst case scenario. Evan down the road, even an hour away. But geographically, I need to know the people to the left and right of me. I need to know this person here and this person here, which I do know. I need to have the points of contact in here, and I need to show up. After you show up, what do? You build rapport. Because the more you trust the people around you, because you know their families, they know your families, you know their potential weaknesses and their strengths, the better off you'll be when shit hits the fan. You need to line out the vulnerabilities, strengths and weaknesses, I call them assets and liabilities, in your own backyard. Who's who in the zoo? Yeah, Sarah is 83 years old. We need to protect her. She's a diabetic. She needs to stockpile insulin. Randy across the street is an Air Force veteran, very intelligent dude. You know, Mike's a Green Beret. He's the security guy for sure. Evan's the EMT. He's got first aid experience. The 4 categories I would look to break these guys down into, and I'll add another one from my Patreon, which if you're interested is patreon.com/Mike Glover. Leadership is important. You got to have leaders. Communications, you got to have commo. It's the staple of survival. If you don't have communications and redundant plans for communications, you won't survive. First aid, and last but certainly not least, because I would put it to the front, security. If you break it down to those categories and assign duties and responsibilities, if shit hits the fan, then you're going to be able to make a plan, which is the next step. Make a plan. Hey, what are we going to do if there's a wildfire? Well, John's got a pasture, and if he has the pasture, we can move the animals down from the hills or the mountains, move them to the pasture. If we have to, we can go down into the valley because Randy has a pasture down in the valley an hour away. Everybody's got go bags packed. Yes, we're going to do a class on Friday on packing go bags, and we're going to do a rehearsal next Friday on getting those go bags, rendezvousing at a certain location, the Walmart parking lot, and then bugging out. Everybody's going to keep their gasoline tanks above half. Luke across the street has a 500-gallon reservoir of fuel. Everybody's going to pay into that, so everybody has 100 gallons of their own fuel there just in case. We have to combine efforts. That's the way we do this. It's not just a community watch of Karens, overwhelming law enforcement because everything they see is suspect. Can you imagine dealing with or trying to facilitate law enforcement by reporting on everything you see? That's what tends to happen in these cases. Leave law enforcement out of it. Let them enforce the laws via the 911 calls they're getting, and let's square away our own shit together. That's the burden of responsibility we need to do ourselves. And I have to step up in my own way. I'm talking to myself when I say this out loud because I haven't been doing that. I mean, I haven't been in Heber, but I'm back home now. Guys, I appreciate you. I'm going to do a segment for my Patreon on building out an AR platform. This is definitely not going to be monetized because they'll suppress me. I will put it on my Mike Glover actual stories. Till next time, peace out, guys.